Well, good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to our friends in Western Canada. We decided to move Table Talks to 1 p.m. so that we could have more people from the western part of this country join us as well. I want to thank you all for joining us today. Welcome to our third Table Talk. We're having fun with these, and I hope you are as well. My name is Ken Fredeen. I'm General Counsel Emeritus at Deloitte, and now Managing Partner of ZSA in-house. And we're focused on bringing value and insights and interesting content to the in-house community in particular, but to others as well that want to listen in. So if you want to know more, you can certainly visit our website by Googling ZSA in-house. Now, today's table talk is on the resilient General Counsel and leadership in the future of work. And just a bit of an overview for this, and then I'll introduce our guest today. And it's this. I mean, COVID has hastened the focus on the importance of leadership resilience like never before. And what we're going to talk about today is what happens when that leader's armor is pierced. There was a recent report done by Deloitte and LifeWorks under the guidance of our guest today, Zabeen, and that was on what happens to senior leaders and identified significant mental health issues and challenges, burnout, including burnout, and leaving their jobs. And that's sort of the environment that we're in. That work was done about a year ago now. And, you know, my position on this, and Zabeen not being a lawyer, but she's going to give sort of an external perspective on General Counsel are no different. In fact, there's been a number of reports from General Counsel talking about the need to either retire or to take sabbaticals or do something different because they are burnt out. And so this work is really important for the General Counsel community and their teams. So combined with that, though, is what's happening in the world of work today, which Zabeen is also an expert on, and that is how do General Counsel lead their teams post-COVID? And what does the hybrid remote workplace look like? And what are some things that General Counsel need to think about as we move into that new world of work that Zabeen is so experienced in? What are the leadership skills General Counsel need? What will they need to develop to be successful in the future? And that's not just for leaders, all leaders, but also for General Counsel. So really, as Zabeen put it when we were preparing for this call, she said, the future of leadership is at an inflection point. Is this a moment or a movement? And I think Zabeen and I are on the same page to say, this is really a movement. It's not just a moment in time. So before I introduce Zabeen, I would like to acknowledge that I work and live in Treaty 13, which is traditional territory to many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, which are right near to where I now live, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And ZSA has offices across the country, and our offices are situated on traditional treaty and unceded territories of Turtle Island, and is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. After all, we are all treaty people. So I'd like to start with an introduction of Zabeen to this topic. Zabeen, just over 4 years with Deloitte. I think it's 4 years and a few months. And you're in a position as executive advisor on the future of work. And I know when I was General Counsel at Deloitte, you and I would luckily catch up for coffee and have wonderful conversations around what you were seeing in Deloitte and in our clients. And I was fascinated by your work. You're a corporate director. You're an executive in residence at Beatty School of Business at Simon Fraser, which is your alma mater, where you received your MBA, and you're a visiting professor at King's College in London. I would love to have your roles, Zabeen. Unfortunately, I don't. Up until September of 2021, you were board chair of Civic Action, and then you had a short stint at RBC, if I'm correct. Just 40 years, just a little bit of experience, increasing leadership roles there, ultimately ending up as Chief Human Resources Officer at Canada's largest bank. Numerous awards and recognition. I just don't want to get into those because there's so many of them and so well earned and deserved for all the work you've done in the community, including Civic Action, which is such an important organization. So you bring all of this experience to Table Talks today. And I know you're not a General Counsel, but I know I'm going to push you a little bit to say you have reflections on the role of General Counsel, including within RBC and beyond, and in clients that you work with. but you're also interested around the new world of work. It used to be called the future of work, but you've renamed that to be the new world of work. And given your recent work at Deloitte, working with LifeWorks around burnout, the impact of COVID on senior executives, General Counsel are senior leaders. And so I know you're going to have perspectives on what all this means for General Counsel. So with that introduction, I now want to more or less turn it over to you. I read through the Deloitte and LifeWorks work. I got to say it was pretty sobering. And there was a part of it that I looked at and said, is this COVID or is this more or less what's been going on? It was just exposed during COVID. So maybe you could start by just telling us how bad is it in the executive suites?
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me, Ken. And I do want to get one thing clear, and that I was 12 when I started at RBC. So for the mathematicians, which maybe is not always what lawyers are, but you can do the math there. But such a pleasure to have this opportunity to have this conversation with you and with all the folks that have joined us. So thank you for joining us. So your question really around this survey and how bad is it? And I'm sure the people, the listeners are experiencing a lot of this themselves. It is, the results of the report do show that the state of well-being, the state of resiliency of senior leaders does pose risks to the recovery and rebuild as we move into this next phase. And one of the things that was very interesting here was how things turned around. Typically, senior leaders, relative to others in the organization, have stronger well-being and resiliency. And what we saw here is that flipped around. And some of the numbers, things like 80% of leaders were exhibiting behaviors that are that really are expressions of burnout. We also saw that 50% of leaders said they were thinking about leaving, downshifting, taking a break. And as we look today, even at the Great Resignation data, which we may get into in a little while, it shows that about 40% of people are certainly contemplating that. And just one sort of technical point here, I would say, is what we looked at. It was 11 organizations, private sector and public sector, CEO -1 and -2 individuals, and we covered about 1,200 people in that group. So it really was quite a broad cross section of organizations.
Why is this? I mean, I looked at it, and part of it was around workload volume, but it was other things as well, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I think the work volumes is what would jump into people's minds instantly. Interesting, the number 2 reason was people feeling underappreciated. And this really gets to this theme of how humanity has really become such an important part of the workplace. That distinction between work and life and how we behave and what we expect has really, it's a thin, it's really maybe a dotted line or not a line at all. And I think it was about around 22% of people who said that part of that was driven by feeling underappreciated. And I was actually, one thing that caught my attention was men were slightly higher than women in terms of that stat. So those were some of the reasons. I would say that this issue of why leaders were experiencing it more or are experiencing it more is because of this concept of loss of control. So one of the reasons leaders are able to manage better, their well-being better, is because we have more control over what we do, where the organization goes. And with COVID, that just went out the window. With health guidelines, with lockdowns, no lockdown, this change, that change, digitization exploding in their kind of e-commerce world, just so many things that were beyond their control, was one of the reasons we saw that flip actually take place. And I wanted to share a couple of quotes from the study, because I think that really speaks to things. Leaders feel that there are different rules for them. All of the other members of my household have struggled, sometimes significantly, with mental health challenges this year. Balancing my support while continuing to appear strong at work has been hard. And there's a lot behind those words, which I hope we can unpack as we go through this.
Yeah, because if I think about that as well, I mean, lawyers, we take the legal profession, lawyers, general counsel are expected to be tough. They're supposed to be strong. They're not supposed to show weakness in any way. And yet they're part of the executive team, which, the numbers are, 80% of senior leaders risk burnout. I can't imagine that general counsel somehow are accepted from that group of executives that are struggling. So how do you look at that then in terms of your ability to lead people on your teams if you yourself are struggling?
Yeah, well, there is, and as we were just talking earlier, I was on a flight somewhere just last week, and it had been quite a while since I had done that, and certainly was paying more attention to the announcements, to the pre-takeoff, and was reminded there about the importance of putting your oxygen mask on first before you can help anyone. And that's very much what plays out with leaders. There's a reason for it. You need to be healthy in order to support others. And what we also know is leaders have a disproportionate impact on the performance of the organization, just by virtue of our roles and by virtue of the decisions we make and the change that we lead. And leaders also set the tone for culture. And so when you have leaders who are actually not only focused on well-being for themselves, but are talking about it, are talking about their challenges and how they're handling it, all of a sudden you normalize things in the organization. It becomes okay to talk about this. And stigma is a huge issue, as you know, with mental health, and more significant again with leaders. And so that notion of that tone setting is a really important one as well.
And there was a recent study where one of the top predictors of people leaving an organization, we know the great resignation now, and general counsel are facing this too in terms of team members leaving, that one of the top predictors is around toxic workplace culture. So I expect that sort of a leader's fragility and how they're thinking about things leads potentially to that toxic workplace culture as well.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have thoughts around what now you had, so 20% obviously were, I don't know if you'd say they were thriving, but what do leaders look like who are thriving or are doing well under the circumstances? What qualities do they have?
That's such an important question. We talk a lot about resiliency, but it is important to, I think, to unpack that. Like, what is resiliency? How do you develop resiliency? I looked up the definition in the dictionary, and it said, able to withstand or recover quickly from difficult conditions. But what is it that you do that enables you? The first thing there is about self-care. It really is about making the time, prioritizing exercise, nutrition, sleep. And that is always hard, but it became more difficult during the pandemic because of the work volumes, because of this responsibility that leaders feel towards their employees and towards supporting them. That really became even less of a priority. The other behavior that that helps with this is just the getting comfortable with being vulnerable, getting comfortable with asking for help, talking about your issues. The survey showed us that 40% said they would find it difficult to acknowledge or accept if they had a mental health issue. And that was slightly higher for women. And 55% were concerned it would be career limiting. And so the risk of actually, speaking up is the perceived risk is high. And also getting professional help. I've spoken with some organizations who actually made arrangements for even more support for their leaders in terms of counselors, and really combining their executive coaching with health and well-being. And they found a really, really low take-up. People are still not taking advantage of that. So it is about getting comfortable and prioritizing that. And vulnerability is also about saying, I don't know, with employees. We don't need to be perfect. We don't need to have all the answers. And but in my experience can you hear me?
Yes, you were freezing a couple times.
Yeah, I see that the internet is deciding to be unstable today.
Go off if it happens again. You can go off screen if you like.
Yeah, okay. And I sometimes have seen with lawyers this need to have all the answers.
Yeah.
Right, because that's what you're trained to do. And it's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say that to employees, to customers. So that resetting this high expectations for yourself. I think healthcare workers are often like that as well. I'm going to share with you a couple more quotes here where someone said, if I'm being honest, I probably have too much pride to ask for help. Reaching out for help would make me feel like a failure. These are people, like you and I, people that have joined us. That's the reality, right? So how do we create cultures? How do we create environments where it's normalized?
And it's interesting when you say normalized, not only within the organization, but also peer-to-peer, right, as part of the C-suite, and also to your team members to normalize it, to have those discussions. I know one of the things that came out of the study was the fact that executives felt that the people that reported to them actually, that it was easier for them than it was for themselves because they had to be this strong individual. But, it's funny because, again, lawyers are known as being tough, strong. And by the way, it's not only about their own teams, but it's also about how they deal with external counsel as well. Mm-hmm. In law firms who are struggling with mental health issues, particularly at the junior level. So that, to me, it seems, Zabeen, if we sort of package that all together, there's a real opportunity here for general counsel to be leaders around this in a way, in terms of showing vulnerability, in terms of asking for help, of making sure the supports are in place, not only for the executive team, but externally as well. There's a sort of a central role, I think, that general counsel can play in all of this.
Yeah, that I hadn't thought about it in that context. And, they touch a lot of people in the organization as well, in terms of other leaders, and are listened to as people also that have objectivity. And so, I think it's a role absolutely that could be played. And also with the more junior people entering into their organizations and who are also expecting this kind of support, because it is more normalized for younger people to be aware of mental health and well-being and to be taking steps to manage that.
So I want to move just quickly because it's all intertwined. That's why I find the work you're doing so interesting, because I want to move into this whole new world of work and the role that leaders play. And it used to be called the future of work, but the future is now. And certainly the pandemic sped things up like we didn't anticipate that they would, in terms of being able to work where you want, how you want to work, and all of those things. So tell us just a little bit about the trends prior to the pandemic, And then what happened during the pandemic, and where does that leave us post-pandemic?
Yeah, thank you. And if I may, I go back to one thing that perhaps I didn't touch on enough. You mentioned the importance of peer relationships, and I think it's important to maybe share some of that. That was one of the surprising findings in this work, where about 60% of people reported that work peers are helpful in supporting their resilience and well-being. And about a third said peer relationships have worsened. And when we stop to think about that, and we've then subsequently had conversations with people who participated in the work, but it's also something that's a lot of organizations have had an interest in. We sort of landed at, when you're more senior in the organization, you're not dealing with your boss every day. And in some organizations, professional services in particular, whether it's consulting and more on the law firm side, you don't even know who your boss is sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And everyone is, in a partnership culture, everyone's a boss. And so it's your peers that you're dealing with every day. And so how you engage around work prioritization to deal with work volumes, around resource allocation, around supporting one another, and really being able to take that enterprise view, not just your own departments or your own billings view. It becomes really important, and how you show that empathy. And sometimes people are more comfortable where they have those relationships to talk about it. So the moving away from just leaders and managers having to support.
Right.
And I've even had conversations with people who, around how employees can support their managers and their leaders.
So I just want to touch on that. You said 60% of executives talked about the importance of peer relationships, and that I forget the numbers, that 40% said that those relationships had deteriorated during COVID. Is that what you said?
Yeah, 30% deteriorated.
30%.
Yeah.
See, because if I could just pause on that, I mean, one of the important roles that general counsel play, or a skill set they must have, is building relationships with peers and building relationships throughout the organization, because quite a bit of the work that general counsel do is around being persuasive counselors and learning to work with them. So the risk there, I guess, is that maybe the skill sets they had prior to the pandemic maybe started to fail a little bit during the pandemic, and is something they're going to have to focus on post-pandemic. How do you build those relationships back up?
Yeah. And I would say that this gets maybe into some of the next conversation around the new world of work. But somebody said to me, a board director, in this case, said, Zabeen, relationship capital, it's like a bank account. We had, a savings account, we make deposits when we connect face to face. Remember the conversation we had in my backyard,
Yes.
right? It was very different than, and you make deposits that you then draw on later. They have been depleted. And so where those relationships have worsened, my hypothesis is it's because we just ran out of gas in the tank in their account. And so what are we doing now to deliberately reconnect with people and to build up that relationship capital? Relationship
and trust capital, right?
Yeah.
Because if you've been vulnerable and you've been scorched on that, the trust is gone. You're going to have to find a way to figure it out, as an example. But interesting. That's something I hadn't thought of, to be honest with you. Even in our prep session, I hadn't thought of that part of it, that need for general counsel to think very carefully about their relationships and how they repair or develop those relationships post-pandemic.
Yeah. And in many organizations, there are new executives that they would never have even met. And so, there might have been conversations online and connections and getting to know, but those might be the ones to even prioritize.
Yeah. Well,
right?
a little story about that, Zabeen. I was talking to a general counsel of a large Canadian corporation. I won't say which one, and she had come on, I think 2 weeks before pandemic, before shutdown. So for over 2 years, she's had to develop relationships and do all of the work that she did, not only with her own team, but with the executive. And by the way, had a couple of CEOs to boot during that time as well. And you think about the stress that's involved in that, and you need to be strong through all of it as a general counsel. My hat's off to her, because that takes real skill sets to be able to accomplish all of that.
Mm-hmm.
But let's talk about the future of work.
Yes.
Past, present, and future.
So in many ways, the trends were just accelerated. I would say we were just fast forwarded with work, with so many things, with how we shop, with how work gets done, with how we consume healthcare, with everything really got fast forwarded and took us to a place we might not have normally gone to or naturally gone to without this burning platform. I mean, virtually overnight, 40% of Canadians started working from home. And all things considered, we did pretty well. And I see that actually as a great sense of optimism, because it speaks to the adaptability of people, where we just made it work despite all the challenges. And we did test and learn. We were much kinder to one another. We got much more human in our interactions. And so for me, it's that acceleration of flexibility, choice, autonomy. It's the understanding of one size doesn't fit all. So there is no one playbook for all employees, or for that matter, for clients, in terms of what makes for a great experience, and that need for personalization definitely got accelerated. And I would say the other trend really is around this notion of stakeholder capitalism, something that I think, again, chief legal counsels usually play a role in that in organizations. And through that, we saw the rise of every stakeholder. We saw the rise of employees in terms of employee voice. And even as recently as the war in Ukraine, we saw employee voice really driving businesses to make decisions to stop doing business or to move out of Russia. They had the biggest voice. Customer voice, certainly their expectations of what you're doing around environment, how you're treating your employees, driving buying decisions. And investors, ESG, I just finished doing some work on the changing agendas at boards, and without exception, the 10 people that I spoke with in large Canadian based organizations, ESG, ESG, ESG. Every committee, every board, every meeting, because there's a lot of conversation externally. We shone a light on many issues, whether it's social justice, whether it's climate, and that is a place where, and maybe we'll have a bit of time to talk about it, is I think that legal counsel can play a really, really important role, because it's still in early stages and it's still quite amorphous. We don't have a lot of standards, right? And so there's a lot of work being done there.
You're so right. I mean, actually, a lot of general counsel either have responsibility for the ESG mandate, or as my friend Simon Fish would say, ESG starts with G, starts with proper governance. And general counsel, without exception, are always involved in governance. So it's interesting how all of that's happening. I mean, that trend was there prior to the pandemic, wasn't it? So
it's just an acceleration.
Your view is acceleration of it. Acceleration, and also that issue about where you work. I mean, one of the big issues that all executives are probably facing is what do we do about people that don't want to come back into the office, or don't want to come to the office, that hybrid work model? that's all been sped up as well, because that movement was there prior to the pandemic as well. So how do you, like, what are the qualities of a post-pandemic leader that will make that leader successful?
Yeah. I will go back here to this, the kind of human side of leadership. Of course, you have to be visionary and strategic, and those aspects remain, important, table stakes. But what we've seen through the pandemic is the reason we actually managed as well as we did in terms of the economic side and even the social side to some extent is because of the humanity that we saw. If you think about those that for example, that really like Bonnie Henry, right, in BC, who was able to stand up there, talk to British Columbians in a very human way, in showing vulnerability, showing empathy. And as another person that I admire a lot, Jacinda Ardern, would say, you can be strong and compassionate. I would say you can't be strong if you're not compassionate. Mm-hmm. Those two are just so intertwined. So in terms of the skills, empathy, compassion, inclusion. And we were talking a lot about diversity, and diversity without inclusion is hollow. You know that better than I do.
I don't know if I know it better, but I know it.
It absolutely matters a lot. There is no question in my mind. I saw that in my career at RBC, and I'm a strong proponent of that. But you need to have inclusive cultures, inclusive practices, and some of it is, at the policy or kind of enterprise level, but a lot of it, again, how do you experience it day to day? If you're sitting around a meeting, look around first of all and see, is this a group that's representative of your organization, of your customers? But what are you as a leader then doing to actually bring those voices out, to help, to make sure that people are comfortable speaking, but to also make sure that they're heard? Because we know, for example, very practically, and I will say that certainly, having experienced it, and most women will talk about, you put an idea on the table, it's not really heard. A man puts the same idea on the table, and it's heard in a different way, but somebody needs to jump in and say, hey, just a minute, I think we need to go back to Zabeen and maybe ask her to talk about it some more, or perhaps perhaps we didn't all hear it. So this day-to-day inclusion, inclusive behaviors becomes really, really important.
So you mentioned three, I think. You mentioned empathy, strategic, inclusion. Is there anything else in those leadership qualities that particularly post-pandemic leaders will need to be thinking about?
Yeah, it's not so much a skill, but this notion of balance between stakeholders is really, really important in every decision that's made. I was talking to somebody about their CEO succession planning and what are they looking for that might be different than before. Certainly empathy is one of those elements, but they talk about this ability to really take a balanced stakeholder approach to making decisions. So we're seeing this move towards better balance in between short-term and long-term, because business is a long game. And to many, I guess I could say talent is a long game as well. So in terms of how you support employees, how you support them during good times and not so good times, and not write them off, if you will, but really think about talent as a long game in the same way. I would say is the other important skill that's now on the table. Progressive organizations, those who have been in business for decades or hundreds of years, and and those are some of our certainly some of our household names. That's the way they've operated. But now I would say
you're still cutting out a little bit.
It's even more so. And again, your legal counsel, your law partners legal partners can really help you, help organizations to get that balanced view by asking really good questions, because that's something you do well.
It's so interesting you'd say that. I mean, that whole topic of stakeholder balance is something, again, General Counsel in the middle of as well. So what you're talking about is leadership in managing those stakeholder relationships, but also leadership of your own team, and which is really interesting. Are there different skill sets that the General Counsel will need to think about in terms of leading that law department in the future, that maybe they need to really focus in and double down on?
Yeah. One of the things this also takes is listening differently, listening to learn, refraining from making judgment or moving to conclusion. And as busy people, we just want to get to the point sometimes.
Right.
And a lot of things are nuanced. You can't, the black and white stuff is easy. This is about so much is in that gray zone. So building those listening skills and the capacity to really be present and to take in and to absorb everything that is being said, not said, to really become attuned to people in that way. And it's going to be more challenging when we don't see our teams perhaps every day in the same way that we might have been before. And so what are we doing to, how are we reestablishing some of those connection norms to allow us to be able to manage in that way? Because the expectations, I think, of employees and clients to some extent is, you need to get to know me, you need to better understand my needs so that things can be personalized. And if you do that, I will be able to give you my best. I mean, there is a reciprocity here that goes with it. It's not just the right thing to do, it's also the smart thing to do.
And if I think back to the LifeWorks Deloitte report, a significant part of the burnout, of the stress that executives under, including General Counsel, is the workload. And so if you combine that with that stress of increased workload to the need to listen, to be empathetic, to all of those skills you talked about, it's almost contradictory to that, because your inclination is, I got 15 minutes for this meeting. We got to come out with a decision. Like, I don't want a lot of different, but that's different than what you were talking about. So
yeah, it's hard. I mean, I remember one of my executive coaches coaching me around that 10 years ago, which is because we were busy then too. Zabeen, you need to make sure you take the time to connect at that hard skill or technical skill is the ability to prioritize. That's the only way that work volumes can be addressed, for us to make those tough choices. And in fact, I just came off a call with a couple of members of my team where we did that. They're quite passionate about something, but I said, really, do you think we're going to get as much bang for the buck? And they're like, yeah, maybe not. Maybe if we just do this one element. So prioritization, super important, and being clear where you need perfection, which is maybe 20% of the time, and where good enough is good enough. And that can also, I find, especially in large organizations where there are so many people involved and so much process often. If I will say to people, this is an A project or initiative or speaking engagement, and let's double down. This is a B. Good enough is good enough.
Yeah,
and, right. So there are very practical, tangible things that I hope that, my hope is always with sessions like this is people take away one or two little tactics that move things forward, but they also set the tone. If you're a senior leader, you're setting the tone for that.
Well, I mean, what I heard you say, which I love, is that, lawyers tend to be perfectionists, and you can't be perfect all the time on everything. And so you're going to have to prioritize what really matters and what doesn't, and allow those things that don't matter, maybe let others make decisions on, or not, as you say, get the absolute right result,
Exactly.
but good enough. So very interesting. So one of the things which you haven't talked about, but I just want to touch upon, is that lawyers are known as transaction folks, right? We go in and do transactions. Your view on that, when we talked about this before, was that, your sense of it is that the General Counsel and the teams are going to have to think not so much about the transaction, but the long-term implications, including all of the implications for stakeholders that maybe they weren't thinking about before. Could you comment on that?
So let me think about that. Yeah, I mean, your example is a good one, but what comes to mind here, and maybe I'll put on my CHRO hat here and kind of go back to when I was in that chair, because that's who General Counsel would be peers with. I would say that the relationship, the conversations with the Chief Legal Counsel were quite transactional. What we could have done, though, is more even around education and learning and reciprocal learning. So if I think about issues around ethics or performance related issues, which again, there's so much gray in that now. And, I would have been involved sort of more broadly on senior individuals and also on policy and kind of aggregate overall, what are the issues we're seeing? What are the trends? What's happening in the organization? And I think that there could have been conversations just around, Zabeen, let's talk about the trends that we're seeing around ethics and conduct. I had those with my risk officer, but I think the legal officer could have been there, and even things like looking for. We talked about diversity and inclusion, and this whole notion of unconscious bias. Is there unconscious bias being applied to? Because in the end, you're making judgments, right, on infractions. Are we applying some unconscious bias around that, or around what our expectations of performance are? And really going into those important thematic areas to bring in the expertise, the thinking, the ability to really kind of do that balancing. That could be, it's a white space that I think I could see GCs going into.
I think that's such an important reflection that you have there. Very helpful, because at the end of the day, lawyers are asked to give opinions, advice to their clients. And they can't really do that if, in fact, they're not aware of their unconscious bias or institutional biases or policies that actually should be rewritten, because they don't accomplish what you need them to accomplish because they are biased. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, that's something that maybe General Counsel need to focus on a little bit more is, are they being involved enough around the development of policies and procedures that result in bad decisions ultimately?
Yeah, and certainly around client policies and even practices, right? We're looking at, for example, where we're using AI and is bias being built into that. But I'm wondering if that is an area where GCs can and their legal teams can bring an important focus and bring in something that's probably not that it's a white space and it's growing in importance. People, certainly ethical AI and the use of AI is a huge area and concern, and in some ways even starts to get into the ESG frame around governance, right?
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You talked about these companies that pulled out of Russia as an example. I think in the old days, what would have happened is there would have been a lot of thought and consideration, and probably a lot of lawyers weighing in on, is this going to work? How are you going to do it and accomplish it? But I didn't see any of that this time. It was like, we're saying we're out and then we'll figure it out after.
Such a good, I love that you bring that up. I remember with one of my partners in the law group on employee relations. And I would say to her, okay, I hear the legal side. Now I want you to think like a business leader. Because I don't just want the straight and narrow legal interpretation, and bring in the nuances, and we'd laugh about it. But I think that's what you're speaking to,
Yep.
right?
That's absolutely right.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know where the line is, but how can you go back to these are the non-negotiables, but the rest is all about, making decisions, judgments, and then figuring out how you're going to manage.
And if I heard you right, you as a former CH leader of an HR group, one of Canada's largest employers, you would have been looking for that advice from lawyers. Just don't tell me what is legal. Tell me what's right.
Yeah, exactly.
Very
exactly.
interesting.
Yeah.
So if that's the sort of a goal that we're looking for, how is General Counsel, how do we go about creating the teams post-pandemic that will result in connected teams, teams that are prepared to be involved in helping with the business decisions, and thinking of all the things that you've talked about? How does a leader, like, what do we expect or what do we need from our leaders in the future, particularly General Counsel, if you can reflect more specifically?
I mean, clearly this is the decade of employee experience. And I just got off actually from an Economist Innovation at Work session that they're running this week. And that is a big theme. And that's for everyone. And sometimes in knowledge workers, professional services, vis-a-vis actually frontline workers, sales organizations, where there's a lot more of the day-to-day engagement, coaching, feedback. That is huge and hugely important in terms of how we lead and how we support people. The other piece is really around, there's probably some skills and knowledge building around what is the role. And even as I think about mega trends and automation coming into law firms, legal departments, there will be using AI to read through documents and pick up important things, et cetera, to be able to look at previous judgments and all of that. They are going to move up more and more into this advisory space. That's happening in the finance function, for example, and there might be some learnings there. It's happening in the HR function as the administrative is automated or actually moved into more of a shared services area. So one is declaring that we want to have more of an advisory role. And then it's around building their knowledge and maybe, pick one or two business partners who you think are open to that, would be supportive and can help you develop to develop your leaders in that space and even maybe create budding up relationships. I always see mentoring as reciprocal. It's never one way. It's you, right? They're going to learn too, but sort of building their skills, their confidence, a bit of test and learn in lower stakes conversations in terms of providing advice, and role modeling it themselves, and then talking about that, bringing in business partners into their organizations to talk about what they're doing. And let me be clear, organizations are on that path already. This is not about starting from zero, from square one, but how do you accelerate that? Because that's the opportunity that we have today, I think, is this more collaborative C-suite, if you will, more collaborative senior leadership, because in crisis, that's what you have to do. You have to break down silos, you have to work together. So I think we're more open to that. This is that turning the moment into a movement. Right.
No, I love that. And so that sort of top-down control leadership style that would have been, 20, 25 years ago is just can't exist for successful teams, because you're looking for a leader who's going to share, who's going to be compassionate, coaching, mentoring, giving opportunities. And part of that will be in a virtual world, because it will be a hybrid work environment, correct?
Yeah, for sure. So it provides, in some ways, we'll have to move faster at figuring that out, because it's happening. And it's back to that, it is that kind of test and learn mindset that we just spoke about. And one of the big learnings as you become a more senior leader is the leverage you have is really around how much potential you can unlock of your people. You can only do so much more.
Right.
You're already working, you're already maxed out. And so reminding ourselves that is actually how we create value, and then actually acting in that way it's something we learn, I think, as we get more comfortable and confident in our own skin. But the biggest job is unlocking the potential of people.
So amazing. I mean, it brought us almost a full circle, didn't it? Because we talked about the study identifying burnout in the C-suite, and the big part of that was too much work. And so, if you have a team that's able to take that work off your plate, if you do it right, you should be a more successful, happier leader.
Yeah.
Amazing. So I've got some, as we move closer to the hour, and I finished right on time. I'm going to throw some things at you, and just curious about what your perspectives are, given all that you do at various levels within organizations. So the first thing I want to ask you is about sort of, if you could wave your magic wand, the Zabeen wand, and what would be the three most significant changes you would like to see in the workplace, if you could wave that magic wand?
Yeah, I mean, it'll be a bit of a broken record, but bringing humanity back into the workplace, because, that's what we are in the rest of our lives. It's not like it's a new skill to learn. Most of us know how to do it, and most of us want to do it. We have permission now. You can be human and strong. The other sort of theme I would say is, how do we build in flexibility, choice, autonomy? I haven't talked as much about autonomy, so I'll just say a quick word there into how we do things. And one of the reasons people liked working from home is they did have more autonomy. There wasn't constant supervision or how you did your work, when you did your work, as long as you got your work done. Right. So moving to this from kind of a FaceTime to outcomes based allows you to really build in that flexibility and choice. And it also requires you to exercise that humanity, to get to know what really matters to individuals. And the last thing, and this won't surprise you, is really around true and full inclusion. Mm-hmm. It is a win-win-win. It's a win for individuals. It's a win for customers. It's a win for organizations. And as you know, I'm passionate about this country. We are a great country. We have, so much to be proud of, but we are not where I would like to see us in terms of inclusive prosperity. And by really building inclusion into everything we do, explicitly and implicitly, it's all the things we do, but it's also, as I often say, no such thing as an innocent bystander. We need to speak up. We need to speak out. We need to use our platforms. We need to use our voice. So those would be the three.
I love those. And quite frankly, the General Counsel could hold that magic wand, because at the end of it, like you said, they tend to be at the center of things. And so they can lead by example as well around things like inclusion and how they operate their teams in terms of autonomy, et cetera. So great opportunity for General Counsel to lead there. Love it. So I want to ask you about a regret. Do you have a regret? I mean, you've had a marvelous career. You've got so much more to give, and you're giving so much more. Is there one regret you look back on and say, I wish I'd done that earlier? I wish I'd, whatever it might be?
Yeah. Great question. I wish I'd been vulnerable much earlier. asked for help, not had such high standards for myself. And it was really in my sort of last few years as CHRO where I got more comfortable doing that. And I got the feedback. People would just say, there's something different about you.
Nice.
And you know what? It made my life so much easier, right? You just get this.
Yeah. But you probably aren't alone there in terms of leaders who are, into a different phase of their career saying, I wish I'd done that sooner. Are you?
No, and while we haven't talked about diversity that much, but certainly for me, I have intersectional being a woman and of South Asian origin, and I think that can sometimes also put more pressure on you because you feel like, and you are actually in more of a fishbowl.
Yeah, very interesting. So that's the one regret. It's completely understandable. But what about 2 or 3 accomplishments that you're most proud of?
Well, I'll break it down into professional and personal.
Yeah.
Overall, it would be my 2 now adult children. And the reason I'm proud of them is they are very socially conscious and have chosen to do work in that area. My daughter's a social worker. My son works for a not-for-profit that focuses on gender violence or really advocacy in that area. He has a business degree. Decided to go in that direction. And I'm proud that they made choices that mattered to them, not that mattered to others around them. And that, they're trying hard to be good human beings. On the professional side, because I get asked that question a lot, the things I remember I'm most proud of at RBC, 2002, I did the work around articulating our values, new CEO at the time with Gord Nixon, as a way to unify companies, many different companies that had come together from acquisitions in kind of as broader financial services. Barriers broke down and we built, this new company. They're still there today. They matter a lot. The next one was work around diversity and inclusion. Enterprise strategy, talent, customers, community, still very much a part of the DNA. And then more recently with the new CEO, when Dave Mackay became CEO, I led the work around purpose and really helping us. And that was 2014. That was pretty new then. And putting that at the core of our business. And today I just watch how empowering it is to people at the bank and in really activating it and bringing it to life. So those are, it goes back to what do I remember most? It's those long-term, sustainable, balanced organization with humanity at the core.
I love it. And happy children and a legacy from RBC. So congratulations on that. So you've got a short little comment for General Counsel, a motivational comment, because look, I know they are not struggling, but there's been challenges over the last 2 years, as with all C-suites. So what little piece of advice would you give to General Counsel or aspiring General Counsel?
Self-care, 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 health, exercise, nutrition, relationships, people, and especially for women, it can be harder with everything, children, which women still, and end up having more responsibility around in general. Don't put yourself at the bottom of the list. Put yourself as at the top of the list, because you can't do any of those things without being well yourself, and because you deserve a good quality of life.
I love it. I love that. No, that's such great advice. I want to thank you. It's such a pleasure having got to know you over the last number of years when I was at Deloitte and you were there. And I really enjoyed our conversations and our most recent one in your backyard. Looking forward to maybe one of those this summer as well. But I'm not the only one that gets invited to something like that, I know. But I want to thank you for all you've done, all you've accomplished, all you've given back. This is so important for a strong economy, for businesses that will support that, an inclusive economy and society. Your work is so critically important. So I want to thank you on behalf of everybody listening in today. I really appreciate it. And I just want to close off by saying we do have another table talk April 21st. What's interesting here, Zabeen, is it's going to be Thomas Kim, the CLO from Thomson Reuters, who's going to talk about his experiences around inclusion, diversity inclusion, but also law to business, the integration of business with law, which is going to be really interesting. So you probably can't make that one, but we're looking forward to that as well.
So Thomson Reuters participated in this research, so you might want to throw a question or two.
I saw that, and I know he's a huge supporter. He's a wonderful man, and I'm looking forward to that conversation as well. So look, on behalf of everyone on the line, thank you so much, Zabeen, for your time. Really appreciate it. And for everyone listening in, really appreciate your time. I know how valuable it is. I hope it was interesting and you enjoyed it, and look forward to talking to you again soon. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.